Hello, welcome to Here We Go. In the next couple of lessons, let's talk about how to count at the end of a game. So in this first lesson, I'll talk about a few basic concepts and introduce the Chinese rule. So of course one side can always resign in the middle of a game, in which side the other side wins. But what if both sides decide to play until the end? Like this. First, we need to introduce a few concepts. The first concept would be komi, K-O-M-I. So because Go is a game of territories, and in an even game, right, Black always goes first. So Black has a natural advantage in gaining territories. So in order to make the game more fair to White, we deduct a few points from Black's total score at the end of the game, and that deduction of points is called komi. So you would hear as a beginner that under the Japanese rule, the komi is 6.5 points, so 6.5. And under the Chinese rule, it's 7.5 points, or 7.5. And then our second concept would be points, right? So in this lower right corner, as we can see, Black has surrounded these 3 times 4 equals 12 intersections. So we can say Black has 12 points on this corner. Similarly, on this lower left, White has 20 points on this corner. Right? So points are the empty space. It can be dead zones, but usually the empty space that you surround, and that is part of your territory. Our third concept for today would be dead stones. Right? So we'll learn about life and death in future lessons. But now all you need to know is that some stones within opponents' territories are alive and some are dead. So for instance, on this upper right, these 2 white stones, I can tell you, are dead stones. Right, so they are a part of the Black territory. They do not gain any territory for White. They are part of the Black territory. And what matters for the Japanese rule, but not the Chinese rule, is that their points are counted differently. So 1 dead stone on the board is worth 2 points, meaning that this upper right has 14 points in total. So 2 more than the 12 points on this lower right corner. And that's something I'll remind you again when we talk about the Japanese rule. Then the fourth concept is called dame, D-A-M-E, meaning a neutral point. So an example would be these 4 square intersections. So on this upper left, I can tell you that Black is alive, right, within this white area. So White has 0 points, unlike the lower left. So White has 0 points, and Black has 8 points on the corner. But dame is the points that are in between territories, right? So if we assume Black and White are both alive, then these 4 points are called dame, because if you play here, you do not surround a new intersection. You go there simply by physically occupying this one intersection, and thus it is the least efficient move in Go, right? It is the least efficient move in Go, and that's why everybody leaves dames until the end of a game, right? So we just fill dames at the very end of the game because it does not gain you any extra point. You're not surrounding an empty space by going in a dame. So those are our 4 concepts for today. So there are 4 different rules for counting: the Japanese, the Korean, the Chinese, and the in-cup. All you need to know as a beginner is that the Japanese rule and the Korean rule are highly similar. And the in-cup rule is very close to the Chinese rule, and you almost never have to worry about the in-cup rule because it's only used during, as you guessed it, in-cups, right? So in-cups were started by a Chinese-born Taiwanese businessman, Mr. In Chang-ki. If you ever participate in an in-cup, either professional or amateur, as I did many years ago, the organizers usually tell you about the rules that apply to the income, but it's very close to the Chinese rule, and you really don't have to worry about it as a beginner. So what is the Chinese rule? So as I mentioned before, the komi is 7.5 points, but technically speaking, it's actually 3.75 stones. Right? So one stone is worth 2 points. Right? That's important to remember. One stone is worth 2 points. So that's why we translate 3.75 stones into 7.5 points. So the idea for the Chinese rule is about occupying the number of intersections on the board. Right? So there are 361 intersections in total. And if we divide that evenly, we get 180.5 intersections or stones, right? And if we factor the komi into this, black will need 184.25 and white will need 176.75 stones to win. However, it's impossible for one side to occupy 1/4 of an intersection, right? Or 1/4 of a stone. So black will actually need 184.5, right? So it's possible for each side to split an intersection and thus occupy half of that, right? So 0.5 points are rare but possible, but 1/4 is not possible. And usually, if you don't have both sides splitting an intersection, black will need 185, right? And white will need 177 intersections to win, right? You have to be greater than this number. And therefore, both sides cannot win at the same time, meaning Go has no draws, right? That's one of the first things you hear as a beginner is that Go has no draws. It's because of the counting method. It's entirely artificial. So in the past, when I started playing, the komi for the Chinese rule used to be 2.75 stones. And it was believed that that favored black. And now it's 3.75 stones, and people believe that favors white a little bit, right? So that's the Chinese rule. It's about counting the number of intersections occupied on the board. Black needs 185 and white needs 177. So it is highly recommended, right, that beginners who play on physical boards use the Chinese rule because it's the most straightforward. So how do we actually do it? So the first step is to fill in all the dames. So here, the dames are already filled. Right, so an example of a dame would be points like this, right? They're neutral, does not gain you points. It's like between the black and white territories, right? These are all potential dames. These are all dames. It's 0 points, but it's one, you occupy one intersection by playing there. Right, so this is all filled. And then number 2, remove all dead stones. Right, so if you're playing on a physical board, what you would do is to remove all these dead stones that I've marked. Black as well, these 3 dead stones. And then you count one side, right? So for instance, let's count black, right? You count the number of live stones plus the number of points. So on a physical board, you can do tens, right? You can remove these points, right? It's the same. Stones and these intersections are the same. So as long as you keep track, it's fine, right? So that's 10 for black. Now we have 3 times 6 plus 2, that's 20. You can fill in these. You can fill in these intersections, right? You can remove these stones, right? These are all blacks. We can do this. You just make it into a number that's easy to calculate. So this will be, right, from the side to the start point, that's always 10. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 15 times 4, that's 60, right? So these are 60 plus 10 plus 20, that's 90, right? So let's say black has 90 points, and then you count the number of black stones left on the board like this. And you usually do it in tens, right? That's easy to keep track of and count. So that's how you do it on a physical board. So in this game, we let Sabaki count it, right? If you score it, it says black wins by 4.5. But what the Chinese rule is worried about is the area, right? So 361, black has 187, which is greater than 185. So black wins this game, right? You count the number of intersections occupied, right? We're not worried about this yet. You worry about this in the Japanese rule. But here it's only about the area, the number of intersections occupied under the Chinese rule. And it's very easy to implement when you're playing on a physical board. Right, so in our next video, we'll talk about the Japanese rule. Thank you for watching.